All right, there we go. Cool. Perfect. All right. So for those who don't know me, my name, and as Mackenzie just said, my name is Matthew Sullivan. I currently live in Florida, and the place we're at right now where we live is maybe 2 miles from the bridge. So we get to dive it frequently. And I think I've put together a decent portfolio of stuff from here, which I assume is why I was asked to do this presentation. Not for my public speaking skills, but I will do my best. If anybody does have questions, please ask them when you think of them instead of saving them for the end. I would much rather this be a discussion than just me monologuing. So whenever something comes to you, please feel free to ask right away. It'll probably lead in some interesting directions that I may not think about otherwise. All right, so as we were just discussing, this is the dive site. So now I can go into a bit more detail. My yellow line there is not the cleanest, but I tried my best. So obviously the bridge is located in Riviera Beach, Florida, and it is right near it's in the actual intracoastal waterway. So you're not diving in the ocean, you're diving in a mix of intracoastal, brackish kind of water and ocean water, depending on when you're actually diving the site. And as we talked about, you can only dive it if you want to enjoy yourself at high tide. So high slack, you get the ocean water coming in. So it'll bring blue ocean water in. The current will die down for a little bit. You can actually see, and you don't have to deal with zero visibility, which we've experienced. And if you try to do it at low tide, you can't see anything. We tried it again recently just to see. All we did was put our face in the water. You can see about 3 inches. And even though you're muck diving, 3 inches is not good enough visibility. You can dive it year round. There are seasonal animals here. So if you have a specific thing you want to see, I would do a little bit of research before coming, just to know when is the best time to see whatever you're looking for. Right now, I was telling Mackenzie and Paul, we're getting into frogfish season. So they start showing up usually in March. This year they showed up in February, and they're really building in numbers. So we have a ton of them around right now, and it's going to keep going through May and June. And if you look on the screen, on my little map here, everywhere in the yellow line you can dive. You can dive outside of that, but if you go too far west, you're going to get into the boating channels, which can get kind of sketchy. If you go too far south, you can get into the boating channels, which gets sketchy. And if you go north, if the current takes you, you're going to be going for a ride and I don't know where you're going to end up. But all of the different, sorry, I keep pointing at it on my screen as if you guys can see where I'm pointing, but you have the bridge itself to dive under, which gives you pilings. It gives you lots of reef fish. Sometimes you get big animals in there. Supposedly there's a Goliath grouper right there right now that we haven't seen. Out front, you get sand and seagrass. So that's where the seahorses, the frogfish, long arm octopus, batfish, they all hang out in front there. You have all those docks you can see. Those are all diveable. So you have a lot of different microhabitats that attract a lot of different species. And as we discussed, I think based on the proximity to the ocean, that is why a lot of this stuff ends up in here, and it just finds a place to sit and it lives out however long its lifespan is in this little area.
I think you can use your cursor to point at things.
Ooh.
Yeah, we can see your cursor.
Cool, thank you. And obviously, if you've heard of Blue Heron, you probably know it because it is arguably, in my opinion, it's the best dive site in the US. You could make the case that there might be some in California or Washington that rival it, but I would probably disagree with you, largely because of how many rare and unusual and hard to see species you can see here with ease. And even here, there's stuff that's rare that still pops up once in a while, which is why we keep doing it after hundreds of dives. Because there's always something, either a new behavior or a new animal to see. We dove it a couple of times this week, and I saw 2 species here that I've never seen here before, and one I've never seen ever. So, there's still fresh stuff to see even after that many dives. Unfortunately, I didn't have a camera, so I have no record of those, or I for sure would have included them in here, but it's always the way. You see the coolest stuff and you don't have a camera.
You mean you dive without a camera?
Well,
Is that possible?
Well, normally, no. My parents were here visiting. They haven't dived in a while, so I was just I was their chauffeur dive guide for a few dives, which of course meant we saw a bunch of cool stuff. But I'm sure I'll see some more. We're diving tomorrow, so I'm sure I'll see something good then. But it's a really easy dive. You suit up in the parking lot. You can walk, or if you stay at one of the hotels along the dock, you can just hop in off your dock or walk in off the beach on the bridge. And the max depth, you have to try really, really hard here to get below 20 feet. So usually we probably average anywhere from 6 to 15, and a deep dive is 18 to 20. So you get really long dives. Usually you're not limited by your air consumption, you're limited by the tide change. So my girlfriend, for example, who is watching this, she can dive there for 4 hours if the tide didn't change because she just doesn't breathe. And some people will still push that and they'll do 3.5, and find there's certain places like out front here, the current doesn't run too much, or over on these docks here, the current doesn't run too badly. So you can hide in some areas and extend your dive significantly longer than normal. And because you can essentially dive until your tank is empty and then just stand up and you're out of the water, it can be a really cool site for spending a lot of time at. And then obviously, if we're all here, we're all interested in what we can photograph at the bridge. Personally, I shoot a Nikon full frame. It's an old D700, but it still works great. And the nice thing about the bridge, or the bad thing if you're only trying to focus on one thing, is that there are so many subjects here that lend themselves to all sorts of different photographic styles. You can shoot macro, you can shoot super macro, you can shoot wide, you can shoot fish portraits. So once in a while you get big animals in there. Eagle rays are pretty common. The big southern stingrays are pretty common. In the winter, people get lucky and sometimes see manatees in there. People have seen bull sharks, mantas, all that kind of stuff. So even though it's known as a macro muck site, there's plenty of other good stuff there as well, which means that you can continue to dive it and always have something fresh to photograph, even if you've done it a lot. Personally, I like to shoot with either a fisheye or a 60mm macro. I find that those are the things that are most conducive to the subjects here. We have a lot of super macro subjects, but my favorite things like the seahorses, octopus, frogfish, batfish, they're larger, so they're more conducive, in my opinion, to a wider lens. And then some of them are big enough that you can, and a lot of these animals don't move, or they move very little. So if you want to get right up on them with a fisheye, you can do that as well. I have some pictures coming up that show that. But there's a million different options for photography here. And if you come to dive it and you're going to be here for a while, bring all of your stuff, because there's going to be something to photograph that you can photograph with all of it. And the hard part will be just choosing which to bring on what dive. So I made a note here. If you can have something that shoots both macro and wide on the same dive, you could cover a lot at Blue Heron. The downside to that, in my opinion, is that you don't necessarily optimize your setup for one specific kind of shot. So your pictures may not be, you might have a wide variety of different kinds of images, but they might not be as good as they could be if you focused on one style of image. And whenever I guide or I teach here, that's the biggest thing that I try to tell people is go in the water with one style of image in mind and focus on getting that picture down on that dive. Don't get distracted by all the other things, because then you'll just come back with a bunch of mediocre pictures that you're not necessarily happy with, instead of 2 or 3 bangers. And now I think we'll get into, so techniques, and we can go through this as I show pictures because each one's a little bit different, but one of the biggest issues here, because it's not pristine, crystal clear blue water, and it's true with most muck sites, is you have a ton of backscatter and particulate in the water. So eliminating that is really, really hard. So snoots or reduction rings, different strobe positionings, those can all help eliminate it. What I've enjoyed doing recently is actually trying to figure out how to incorporate backscatter into my pictures to make them a little more interesting, because I think they can add quite a bit to it. And I have some examples, and they don't, because the first thing people say when they want, when they come and they want to do a photography course or whatever, it's like, I want to get rid of backscatter. I'm like, okay, you picked the wrong dive site to do that, but we can try. Or what might be easier is if we just figure out how to make it work in the picture. And now we will get into the actual images themselves. So kind of just setting the scene as to what you're diving on when you dive here. You have, with all the docks and the bridge pilings, you have tons of life covering them. And you could spend multiple dives just going up and down the pilings, trying to find what's living there. You'll get seahorses on that. You get all sorts of different. Did the screen change for you guys?
We see just like a little sliver of a picture.
That's odd. Okay, let me.
There you go.
Okay, so we skipped one. All right.
Maybe if you go back one, maybe it'll be there.
Pictures or nothing?
Now you got pictures.
Okay, cool. So these are the ones I was trying to show.
Okay.
Technical difficulties, I'm sorry. So yeah, bridge pilings. The one on the right is actually a little tiny loading dock for fishing boats. The fishermen often clean catches there, so they'll just toss stuff off, which attracts small fish, which attracts bait fish, which attracts larger fish, which attracts rays and all that kind of thing. So this little dock is only about 4 feet deep. We've probably seen 10 or 12 different seahorses on that dock over the course of a few months. We've seen a bunch of frogfish there. You also get eagle rays coming through there. You get jacks hunting those bait balls, which can be really, really fun. Usually in the fall, the bait balls show up. So you'll get them, and you have in the black and white picture there, you have one of the Almaco jacks that hunt all the bait fish around the docks. And that's just a blast because you're in 8 feet of water and you just have thousands of little silver sides getting mauled by jacks all around you, which is bait balls are always a lot of fun, no matter where you have them, and having them on a muck site, especially when you can get them with cool sun rays because they're around the docks and things like that. And there's almost nothing that I enjoy more than good sun rays in a wide angle picture, and all of the docks and the bridges here really allow for that. Now it's not going to let me go forward. Oops. Now we'll get into the critters because that's what everybody cares about when they come here anyway. So there's a bunch of different octopus species here. The common octopus, shockingly, is the most common. We're just getting into the season now where they're abundant. So right now they're relatively small. You see them in bottles and shells and things like that. Come May and June, you could see 20 of them on a dive without necessarily really trying. They're everywhere. And the ones that live in places in areas of the dive site where they see divers frequently, they end up not having any sort of real care about you. So you can get right up on them. Sometimes you can do the little thing where you stick your hand out and see if they'll come out and give you a little handshake. This one lived in a pipe near the bridge for a few months, and he was, or she, was not very shy at all. So you'd get down in there and he'd come right out and look at you and kind of show you his suckers, and then he'd throw something out of his den, or he'd clean his den or blow water. And they usually, you can tell if they're annoyed with you because they'll direct their water jet at you, and you can actually feel their little like puff of water as they shoot it at you. But this guy just seemed to enjoy the attention. And for the imaging aspects, inward lighting I found, or cross lighting, which is when you point the strobes at each other. So you'll put your subject in the middle of your strobes and point the strobes directly at each other across the subject. Not only does it bring out a lot of texture and contour and detail that you might not get to see otherwise, especially in a muck diving site, it cuts out a lot of the background. So you don't, and there's still backscatter in this image, but not a lot, and you can't really tell. So all of those inward lighting techniques, or the cross lighting techniques, where you're not blasting light into the background and you're only lighting the very little bit of water between you and your subject, works really well at sites like this for not getting backscatter. And it can be a bit of an unusual look and one you don't see as much. And like I said, it brings out a lot of contrast and texture that you don't necessarily get to see if you just light something straight on. You can use snoots for this. You can use reduction rings for this. Anything that cuts the light down a little bit and doesn't let it bleed into the background works well. And I have a ton of pictures in this slideshow lit that way. So whenever they come up, I'll let you guys know. Another common octopus, this one was hunting along the bottom and then just parked itself in one spot and sat there. It was a really like the current was heavy that night, so all sorts of stuff was in the water. Nothing was working photographically. So I just figured I'd try to see if I could turn the particulate into the water into something interesting. So I put my light behind the octopus and backlit it and did a really slow shutter speed to let the sand streak through the frame, and then snooted the octopus from the top. So it freezes the octopus for the most part, but then you still get the motion in the background with all the sand flowing through there. It's a shot I'd like to recreate because it's not quite how I want it, but there's plenty of them here, so I'm sure I'll have the opportunity to try it this season. But yeah, I love octopus. They provide endless photo opportunities, and this is another common octopus. This is arguably my favorite species here. It's a long arm. They're like the Caribbean version of the mimic octopus. So if you've seen the mimic in Indonesia, everybody knows about that species. The long arm here is the Caribbean equivalent of that. So they're built the same way. They're very long and spindly. They have the little eyebrow horn tuft things. They do the flounder mimic. Whether they're mimicking something or not, I don't really know, but they do it where they fold all their arms around and kind of do the little flounder swim along the bottom. These guys seem to be around all year round. They don't have a season as far as I can tell, and they're usually pretty shy. So if you come up on one and it's sitting in the sand like this, usually they just suck into the bottom and you're never seeing it again. Once in a while, you get one that is inquisitive, and if you get down low to the bottom, they'll stand up to get a better look at you. So if you get low, they peek up. If you raise up, they'll kind of sink down a little bit. So, this one's out in the seagrass. I couldn't really get all that close to it, so there was no chance to snoot or cross light or any of that kind of thing. So I used a really low aperture to blur out all the distracting backgrounds. And then I actually lit it with one snoot from, way up above, so that it just kind of softly lit it. So the octopus stands out. You turn the ugly background into something that's not necessarily so unappealing. And then a bunch of jacks came in and ruined my fun because they showed up, took note of the octopus, he disappeared, and that was the end of my photo shoot with the octopus. But another thing I would like to do more often that I always forget about is shooting with some natural light in the frame, which is easy to do here because the dives are so shallow. And it can create some images that I don't have necessarily in my portfolio, or that look a bit different than the dark, moody, contrasty pictures that I normally take. And then the next species we have, Caribbean reef octopus. There's arguably the most famous octopus in Florida is at the bridge right now. She's had her eggs in a pipe for about a month now, and it seems every photographer in Florida and some places outside of that has come to see her. You can actually if you check on her every few days, you can watch the babies grow. She first had them, they were just pure white eggs, and now there's legitimate little octopuses in the egg cases now. I have not photographed her. I've mostly left her alone, but this is a Caribbean reef we saw back in the fall, hunting along one of the bridge pilings. They're really cool. They move almost like liquid, but they're much shyer than the common octopus and a lot harder to photograph because they don't let you get as close. This one was lucky. I don't know if it had something or if it was just a unique individual, but he sat on that piling for quite a while and just let me take a few pictures before he moved on. It's actually wide angle at night, wide angle snooted. I have a snoot and or a reduction ring on my strobes here for almost every dive, unless we have really good visibility and I'm shooting wide angle, just because it's easier to control the light that way, and it's much easier to avoid backscatter. And I will do that for almost every muck site I dive. anywhere, not just blue heron, just because A, those are interesting imaging tools, and B, you have a lot less backscatter to deal with than if you're running diffusers or bare bone strobes or something like that. So I am wholeheartedly in support of snoots, and they can be used for more than just the spotlight effect that they were famous for when they first came on the scene.
How'd you get the comet in the background?
So that's my girlfriend's flashlight. So it was a little dull without something else in the background, and I would have loved to have had another one on the other side of the piling. But unfortunately, her arms aren't 9 feet wide, so we just had to settle for the one. But I think it adds just a little bit of interest in the background, as opposed to just being a blank black background. But it might have worked without the light, but I just think it adds a little bit extra pizzazz, maybe is the right word, to the picture, having that light in the background there. There is there are actually two more octopus species that are here. There's brown stripe, which I've not seen here. They're quite rare. And then the holy grail is the blanket octopus. Usually they're all seen offshore on the Blackwater dives, but in the fall, on a day that I was diving the bridge, somebody posted a video from Blue Heron of an adult female blanket octopus in 8 feet of water swimming around at the surface with her blanket all going. So that'll hurt forever until I see one myself, but at least I know that they're here and possible to see. So then we're just going to go through some random stuff, some random cool critters, cool pictures from the bridge. There's box crabs are another of my favorites. I'm not huge into photographing crustaceans, but the box crabs I'll make an exception for just because I think they're cute. And the flame box crabs can be quite large, probably 6 or 7 inches wide. This one is a big male guarding his female while she molts. So even while she's going through all that, they will not let go. And if he decides he wants to go somewhere, he's going to pick her up and shuttle her with him. In this case, he had her just in one spot underneath a ledge, and seemed content to just wait for her to finish molting. We didn't stay that long because that can take hours and hours and hours. But again, the inward lighting with two reduction rings to cut out the background and focused on the female, because there was no way to get them both in focus. And I kind of like the out of focusness of him looming over her in the background with his claws highlighted. And again, much easier to do with reduction rings or snoots than if you had diffusers where your light can kind of spill anywhere. We have a bunch of different box crabs at the bridge too. I think there's 5 species. The flame is the biggest and the shiniest. So that's usually the only one I photograph. But box crabs everywhere. You can see, 10 or 15 on a dive. Maybe one will be a flame. They seem to be the most uncommon. And then there also are a ton of other crustaceans here. Some people specifically like them. They're not my favorite thing to photograph. So admittedly, I overlook them a lot of the time, which I probably shouldn't because they make for fantastic subjects. But usually I'm on the hunt for something like the seahorses. I will photograph every seahorse I see if it's in a good enough position. And right now there's dozens of them at the bridge. It's hard to do a dive right now without seeing, 3, 4, 5. I think the most we've seen in a dive was 8. And I know there are people who were diving in January, February, which seems to be their peak, who were seeing 15 or 16 on a dive. And they utilize every habitat here. So whether it's rubble, whether it's the bridge pilings, whether it's muck, whether it's sand and seagrass, they use it all. I don't know, honestly, how a lot of them don't end up crushed, because a lot of them live in like 2 or 3 feet of water right off the beach, and you have all the beach goers and all the divers, but they seem to do okay. I had a heartbreaking moment earlier, a couple weeks ago. I got up to a pair of seahorses and I watched them mate in front of another photographer while I couldn't photograph them. So that'll hurt for a long time until I get to see that myself. But yeah, and they come in every variety of color. We have orange here. There's a different kind of orange right there. There's brown. They come smooth, and this is all the same species. There's 2 species here, lined. These are all lined seahorses. They're the most common. and seem to be the most variable. So you have orange, brown, white, red, yellow, tan, every variation in there, hairy ones, stripy ones. Again, still all the same species. This one's a big female. She's been around for a while. And as far as we didn't check on her in the last 2 weeks or so, but she's been here at least since December in the same small little area. She did have a mate. I don't know whether he was pregnant last time I saw him. I'm sure he's not by now, unless she loaded him up again. But she's a really, really cooperative seahorse. I love all the hair on her. And another, natural light image with just a little bit of strobe to freeze her. Shallow depth of field because she has all that disgusting crap in the background that nobody needs to see in detail. And then, the previous pictures, if I can go back, were all snooted / cross-lit, depending on the individual. I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my slideshow here. There we go. So the seahorse on the left was lit with one snoot and then a strobe to light up the sponge in the background. And then the dark one, which is actually this same seahorse, she was lit with snoot from the left, strobe on the right with the reduction ring, cutting across her to bring out some texture and highlight all those different hairs and things like that. This is arguably my favorite seahorse picture I've taken. I was pretty happy with this one. I haven't actually shared this yet, so this is the first time anybody's actually seeing this. But this is another line seahorse. They get quite big, probably 6 inches. This one was enormous, and she was actually so she kept swimming at me and I wasn't realizing what she was doing. And then I realized that she was actually feeding on all the little shrimp and invisible things that I was stirring up as I moved away from her. So she kept following me. I kept stirring things up. She kept following me. I kept stirring things up. So then finally I decided that if I just sat there, she wouldn't keep coming towards me. That didn't work. She still kept coming towards me, but I did manage to get a couple pictures of her. And this one I really, really liked. Snoot from the right and strobe with reduction ring from the left. Again, the area she was in had maybe 4 feet of visibility. So there's a ton of backscatter in the water. But if you do the lighting right, you can cut almost all of it out. And I did, had to clean a few scraps out of there, but not much. And certainly not as much as you would get if you had them lit, face on. And then also what you get by doing that is you get all the different texture in her face and on her body with all her different, contours and the ribs and the horns and all that kind of stuff.
Hey, Matt, I have a question. How do you snoot from the right, given that your shutter's on the right? I'm just curious. I'm sure you have a way, but.
Oh, well, so I just have it. I had it way out on an arm, and I get that set first.
Okay. So you walk it down on an arm. You don't hold it in your hand.
Oh, no. I always have it down on the arm because that would I've tried it hand holding and I've never succeeded in doing it all that well. So yeah, I'll put the snoot out long on an arm, and my camera's so old and slow that the autofocus barely works underwater. So I'll usually lock the focus at a certain point, then lock the snoot in to light that particular focal plane, and then try to compose based on, where my focal plane is, compose within that. So, the seahorse, I autofocused on her when it would work, got her sized in the frame the way I wanted it, then messed with my lighting, and then went back and photographed her. It's a process, but thankfully at this site, because it's so shallow and because a lot of this stuff doesn't move very quickly, you can usually get away with taking the time to do all that. Without the waste.
That's a beautiful shot. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you like it because I like this one too. So we were talking about, doing the close focus wide angle of a lot of the stuff here. So this is a full 180-degree fisheye picture on the left of the same seahorse that I started with, the orange one. She's pretty big, so it's not like she's minuscule, but once in a while it's nice to change it up and go from the studio style portraits to shoot something a little bit different. And like I said, we have enough macro subjects here, like the frogfish and the batfish and certain seahorses, that are definitely big enough to do some close focus wide angle work with and incorporate some of their habitat into the background. It puts them in their home that you can see it a little bit better and visualize it a little bit better. So it's not an aesthetically pleasing spot that she's picked, but it's still cool. It tells a bit more of a story with the dock in the background and the fish going behind her and the sun rays. And they often pick these very unappealing places to live. So if you're coming to Blue Heron for the aesthetics of the dive site, you should pick somewhere else. But the animals here are fantastic. And even though the habitat might not be beautiful, it can still tell a story if you incorporate it into the picture. And then and that was just one snoot from the top. So I didn't have to light all the crap in the water, and you can still see it obviously, but there's only so much you can do when the visibility is that bad. And the area she particularly lives in is really, really mucky. So any little movement and you get a huge cloud of dust. So buoyancy and watching your fin kicks are another big thing here, for your own sake, much less everybody else's or the sake of the animals. Because if you want good pictures, the less stuff you kick up, the better, obviously. And then on the right, we have another one of the, still, again, all line seahorses. This one was, we formed an emotional attachment to her because she was around for 6 or 7 months on the same dock piling. We could go there regularly and see her. I stopped photographing her after the first 2 or 3 times because there was no need. And after that, I just wanted to check on her and make sure she was okay. And then just probably a couple of weeks ago, she finally disappeared. Not sure where she went, not sure if she just passed on, but it was sad. But either way, got a couple of pictures of her that I enjoyed. And that one was just a single reduction ring strobe from the left, just to cut out the bridge. The piling was right behind her. But if you control the light properly, you can get rid of that distracting background, even though she was pretty close to it. Okay, I don't know if it's ever going to change. And then we have, so like, obviously the superstars of the bridge, in my opinion, are batfish, seahorses, frogfish, stargazers, those kind of things. But there's a lot of other cool species here. Pike blennies are one of them. They're relatively reliable. You can find them on most dives if you're looking. Getting them displaying is not as easy. So the males will do this whole throat out, fin up display. It happens really, really quickly, and there's no guarantee if they do it once that they're going to do it again. We found this one and sat with him for over an hour, and he displayed for about 1.5 seconds in that entire time. And I missed the first one. It was out of focus, and then I managed to get the second one. But one of the big things that I think is beneficial everywhere, but especially here, is to know the natural history of whatever subject you're shooting. So know that the pike blennies will display, know how they display, get your lighting all set up ahead of time so you're ready for it, get your focus point set up ahead of time so you're ready for it. So what I did is I just I locked the camera onto where he was. I put it on the bottom and then just sat there and waited. And it really, really hurt my neck. But eventually, he did display, and if you're quick enough, you can get the shot off. This was shot with about 1 foot of visibility. So again, a ton of crap in the water, controlled lighting with the snoot and the reduction ring, one from the left, one from the right, and really, really close to your subject, so you don't have to shoot through a lot of water. Can eliminate a lot of backscatter without having to do anything in post. I'm sure I cleaned out a couple pieces in this, just because there's always some backscatter, but not a substantial amount. And my computer's ancient and very slow, so if I had to clean out too much backscatter, I would just never edit anything. So I've just stopped bothering. So also controlling my light underwater has helped with that as well. Another of the famous individual bridge fish, this jawfish has been around for a few months. He's on his 7th clutch of eggs right now. His female is trying to starve him to death because she will not give him a break. He's had a couple 2 or 3 day breaks here and there, but then she loads him right up again. And we didn't see him for the first, I think, 5 clutches he had. This was his 6th, and we finally went and saw him. He's enormous, so he's he has a while before he starves, I think. But yeah, the jawfish incubate their eggs. They're usually a little more skittish when they have the eggs. This banded, he might just be used to divers, or I don't know what his deal is, but he will let you get right up on him and fire away. What I decided to do was try to back off a bit, because everybody who's photographed him has photographed him full frame with his whole face taking up the image, and they're cool, but everybody's pictures look the same. So what I tried to do was back off a little bit. I lit him with just a snoot and let a bit of natural light bleed in there, so you can kind of see his surroundings. And I personally think it's kind of interesting to see it like that. It's a different style image. But he has another clutch here. I would love to go get him giving birth. I don't know if that's going to happen. There's been a woman who's spent almost every day with him for every clutch he's had, and she hasn't gotten the birth shot yet. So I don't know if I will be that lucky, but I will try. But whenever they give birth, I guess it's right at dusk, and they just spit them out and they're gone in a few seconds. So you have to really put your time in and really get lucky and hope it happens when the tides actually line up for you to go, because he's in one of the very current swept areas of the site. And then right next to him, literally right next to him, about a foot away, is one of the other jawfish species we have here, the yellowheads. Everybody who's dived the Caribbean knows about this species. They're spectacularly beautiful and notoriously skittish. Also, like the banded jawfish next to him, this one does not seem to have any fear of divers. And this is shot with a 60mm macro on full frame. So it's quite a wide field of view, and it's not cropped, and he let me get right up to him. Usually you have to shoot these guys with 105s or 150s or 200s to try and get them to be a substantial size in the frame. But he just doesn't seem to care. He'll go down, he'll pull sand out of his burrow, spit it out. He'll eat in front of you. He'll rearrange his burrow, whatever. He'll go about his daily life with you right there, which most jawfish don't do. So he's pretty unique. I'm hoping that he ends up with a clutch of eggs as well, because he, being as unshy as he is, I think could lead to some really, really cool pictures. And this is an example of one that's just get low and put open water behind your subject, crank your shutter speed up. No real fancy lighting here. Still the snoot and the reduction ring, just because that's what I dive with all the time. But you could get the same look without those, just by having the open water in the background and changing your settings around. And then Lancer dragonets, another random but cool fish we have here. These are two males fighting. You can usually at dusk, if the tide lines up and you go out at dusk, you can see little groups of these dudes. The males will fight each other. There's always a couple females watching, and then whoever wins the fight gets to go and mate with all the females. We've watched it a few times. I have missed every single mating shot. I just haven't managed to get it in focus, and it happens so quickly. But again, it's one of those things where if you know the behavior, once you see the males start fighting, one of them's going to, you can get pictures like this where they're displaying at each other. And then as soon as it's over, one of them's going to mate with all of those females. So if you can get ready, you can get a cool mating shot. I know some other people who have gotten those. I am not lucky, but hopefully I can get one soon. Cowfish, this was a slow shutter snoot shot, just to change it up a little bit from my normal dark style of snooting. So set the camera to rear curtain sync, line up the cowfish in the frame, and try to, this one's a lot harder than snooting something that's static, because you have to move the camera at the same time. But so I took 100 frames of this thing, and maybe 2 turned out. This was arguably the better of the 2, even though I cut off his body a little bit, but they're still cute, so I figured it was worth saving. And here's an example of when I think backscatter adds to a picture. So this little trunk fish, to me, it looks like he's floating through outer space, and those are all little stars around him. And if I cleaned out every single one of those, those specks in post, it probably wouldn't be that interesting an image. But I find it much more compelling with all the little, star pinpricks around him. And he looks like the big planet that's floating through space. Just a single snoot. These guys are not the easiest to shoot, because they kind of just bounce around in the water with no real purpose, almost like a butterfly in the air. But once in a while you get lucky and get a shot of one. in focus.
All you need now is that comment from the other picture.
Yeah, exactly. I should have photoshopped it in. Scorpion fish are everywhere here. These are both spotted scorpion fish. They're two different ones, but just being able to go back and shoot the same subjects over and over again really is one of my favorite things about the bridge, because you can practice all sorts of different techniques on the same kind of animal. The scorpion fish on the left was just a single snoot on a night dive. That's a big fish, but then the one on the right is the biggest scorpion fish I've ever seen. We were calling it scorpion fish shack. It's probably 2 feet long. Its head is enormous. That's a 180-degree fisheye image, not cropped. He's just that big. But again, there's so many cool things here, and because they're relatively reliable and they don't always move, you can go back and see the same subject again and again and shoot it in different ways if you choose to do so. Now getting into my favorite bridge guys, stargazers. All of a sudden you'll find 10 in a week, and then you won't see any for 2 months, and then you'll see 5 in a week, and then you won't see any. I don't know how they come and go or where they go, but they're one of my favorite things to see, and they're also really difficult to photograph, because usually, unless they're for lack of a better term, stupid, like the one on the left, they bury themselves completely in the sand. So all you might see are the eyes, and then if you go to brush them off, they'll just dig deeper in. This one on the left was not the wisest of stargazers and left himself almost entirely exposed. That's also a fisheye shot, and snooted from the top. And my buddy Aaron had his light in the background to almost backlight it. The easiest way to find these guys is when they leave a footprint. So even if you don't see the actual fish, which usually you don't, you can see where they've dug in, and the sand is a different color and it's vaguely stargazer shaped, and you can sometimes wave the sand away and find one sitting there, and then you get that creepy looking pug-like grin on the right that will be exposed if they don't actually bolt or they don't dig deeper down. So that one on the right is lit with a single snoot, shot straight down, and then the snoot was coming in like almost laying on the sand behind the fish. And then this is the same fish, just shot with a single snoot from 2 different directions. So the one on the left, I shot it from below his jaw. It was off camera. And then the one on the right, I shot it from above the fish, off camera, and shot it, aiming down on him. But same fish, you get very, very different looks, which is, if you especially here, being able to do such long dives, you can take your time with the subject and really work on it. And I like both of these for different reasons, but it's the same fish and looks like but it's a completely different image. And I'm rambling, so I'll go a little bit faster now. But polka dot batfish, the most common batfish species we have here. Like all batfish, notoriously shy. So usually if you get up on them, all they do is turn their back on you. And as soon as they do that, the game's over, and they're never going to let you photograph them. So this guy's already in the process of turning away. As you can see, I was tried to line up on him head on. He was having none of that, and they just turn away. Two strobes with reduction rings to cross light them. There's still backscatter in there. To me, it doesn't take away, so I wasn't going to spend the time to clone all that out. But again, the cross lighting brings out the texture and some contrast and shadow that you wouldn't get if you lit it from the front. And then you don't also light up all that background or all the backscatter in the background. Short-nosed batfish, yawning with its cute little boop mouth. We saw one slurp up a fireworm recently. I didn't know anything ate fireworms, but apparently batfish do. I was photographing it, and it actually started swimming at me, which they never do because they're usually turning their back on me. And he plopped onto the bottom and slurped up a fireworm like it was spaghetti. And you can actually see on the front of the short nose mouth here, there's a fireworm bristle sticking off his mouth right there. So it seems to be a major part of their diet. I can't imagine it's enjoyable, but something's got to eat them, I suppose. And you can see his lure tucked up under here. One cool thing about the batfish is they are anglerfish, but unlike frogfish, which has the visual, so frogfish lures are visual. They cast them out, they dangle them around, wave them around to try to entice prey to get closer. Batfish actually have a chemical lure. So they bounce it in each direction, and each time they bounce it, they cast some chemical smell out into the water to attract prey closer, which I think, as a fish nerd, I think that's pretty cool. On the left, I'm not entirely sure which species this is. I think it's probably a hybrid between polka dot and short nose. And on the right is a polka dot. There's a lot of these kind of ambiguous batfish here that I think could be a mix of any of 3 species. And they're impossible to tell apart, I think, without any genetic testing. And then my favorite fish, my long-nosed batfish. This one, I guess everybody saw it on the little presentation preview. Really rare fish. I've only seen this once. I have 2 pictures of it before it took off like a rocket. I didn't know batfish can move that fast, and he just shot straight up off the bottom and took off. But again, cross lighting to cut out the background. It really highlights what I think is the shape, the feet. He looks like a little stealth bomber to me, ready to take off. And that the nose is comically long if you see it from the side. It's, a good length, a good portion of the actual fish's length is taken up with that nose, and his lure is tucked up under there as well. And I just love their perpetually grumpy little mouths.
Lisa beat me to it in the chat, but maybe the fireworms are like jalapenos or Mexican food for the batfish. It's like when they just want something really spicy, heat things up a little bit.
You could be right. I hadn't thought of that, but the amount of batfish here that have bristleworm bristles attached to their faces is remarkable. So maybe all they like is spicy food, and they're not after any of the non-Mexican stuff. And then my favorite group of fish, I'll end with. These are we have, I think, 6 frogfish species here. Most of them are pretty uncommon. This is a dwarf. They max out at about 1 inch. That's as big as they get. And recently I found out that they only live about 6 months. So they go from minuscule to about 1 inch long in 6 months, and then they die. Right now we're in dwarf frogfish season. So there's a couple around. This one is about maybe ½ inch long. One of the worst subjects to photograph just because they're so tiny, and it's easier for them to hide under things, and they live in not very appealing habitats. So trying to get a cool picture of them without seeing all the stuff around them, or without something in front of them, or without shooting down on them, or without their face wedged into a hole is difficult. We found 3 on this dive. This is the only picture I have of any of them that turned out reasonably well. And I felt that I needed to include it just because we do see them here. They're a very cool fish, very hard to find. Usually you see them at night because they reflect the light kind of well. They usually seem to be white or a yellowish color, which stands out even in the sand or the seagrass. And this guy stood out brilliantly. And even though they're tiny, they still have that distinct frogfish shape, although they're very laterally compressed. So if you see them from the front, they're almost perfectly flat, but from the side, they just look like a normal frogfish. And then striated frogfish is the most common species we have here, which is unusual because anywhere else in their range in the Atlantic, they are exceedingly rare. I suspect there are 2 different species here because we have the hairless varieties and then we have the hairy ones. The lure shape is different, and the body patterning is different. I don't know if supposedly they are 2 different species, but there's argument about it. This is the Scabers version. Their lure is long and wormy, and you can see she's clearly had success with it because she's loaded up with a meal there. This one was around for longer than most frogfish are here. So we were talking before this presentation started that most of them live 9 months to a year. We found her first in September last year, and she was around into January, which is very late for them to be here. She was the only one around at that time. She got quite big over the time we saw her. She probably ended up about that size. And but so here it's again that same mucky area with the wide angle seahorse. So a single snoot to light her, cut out as much of the stuff in the water as possible. And then my girlfriend with her Comet flashlight in the background, just to provide a little bit more interest and balance out that side of the frame. All the same species. Here we have the hairy variety on the left and the non-hairy variety on the right. I don't know. They don't look like the same species to me, but maybe they're just that variable. The one on the right is the one that showed up earlier in the season. She showed up in February, and then she went from that color to almost pink, and now she's really, really bright orange, almost like this one, over the course of about a month and a half. So they can change it. It can't change instantly, but they can certainly change their color quickly. And she has probably quadrupled in size since we first saw her. So she's eating quite well also. The one on the left is also apparently a female, just based on how big she is now. When we first saw it, it was not very big, maybe about 2 inches. Now she's probably 5, almost 6.
Is there any understanding as to why the color change happens?
I don't know. So the first time we saw her, the one on the right, she was on a sponge with similar coloration. The next time we saw her, which was maybe 3 days later, she was in the sand a few feet off the sponge and had turned a pinkish gray. And then when we saw her recently, she was in another area up against a rock and had turned orange. So I don't know if they're actually changing color to match their surroundings, or if they just, honestly have no idea how it works, because half the ones you see here are not at all camouflaged against anything. And I have I'll go through them real quick. Like this guy, the black ones, there's a couple of them around right now that are pitch black, and they're living on barren white sand. So they can't possibly think they're camouflaged. So I don't know. I don't entirely know what the color change is about. I haven't seen any of the black ones change color. It seems to be when they're black, they stay black. And the ones that are the hairy ones, like these guys, don't seem to change color either. Another reason I suspect that they could be different species, because these guys don't change at all, and these ones seem to change with relative ease. Somebody chatted.
Matt, I have a question that I know you haven't lived there super long, and but a few years ago there was like a group that kind of put some of the collection that was going on in the area to an end.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if, just talking with other divers in the area, if there's been kind of a noticeable like improvement in quantity and variety of things now that like all the collection is banned there at the bridge.
It might be, because I mean, I've been diving here for probably 15 years, not with the regularity that I obviously do now.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that I'm seeing things just because I'm familiar with the dive site now. But also there definitely seems to be an increase in certain things here and a decrease in stuff that I used to see. So I don't know if there's any correlation with the collecting. I'm sure the reef fish for sure are doing better now than they were. You definitely see more angelfish and things like that than we did way back. But as for the unusual guys like these, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
And somebody asked.
Yeah. I was just curious, like just being in the community, if you kind of heard, like if people think there's been a really noticeable impact of the change in the collection.
Not that I've heard.
Okay.
I'd be happy to ask, because I know people who've been diving here every week for 20 years, so they probably would have a better idea.
Yeah, just curious. I only dove there before kind of those changes.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it's because you dive there so much, but like we saw some cool things, but not nearly kind of the order of magnitude of what you.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting when I talk to people, because to me it seems like it has gotten substantially better, but I also don't know if that just happens to be because we've dived it so much that we're seeing these things more frequently. Although even when we first started diving here, we were seeing seahorses and frogfish that I never saw here before. So it maybe, but I'm not entirely sure. And then Helga asked, are some of these unusual species a result of aquarium escapees? Usually the things that escape here die off pretty quickly, or other than lionfish. So lionfish are unfortunately established here. Thankfully, they're not here in enormous numbers, but they're around. Usually there were a couple of nudibranchs here in the fall that for sure came from an aquarium. They're a Janulus species that's only found in, as far as I know, in the Indo-Pacific. So there's no way they got here without somebody bringing them here. And then they disappeared all at the same time. So I don't know if they were released and then somebody else collected them to get them out of the water. But usually if there's an unusual, there was a cuttlefish here in the fall too. There's no cuttlefish over here, obviously. But usually those things that are introduced die, other than the lionfish, die off pretty quickly. A lot of so the unusual stuff here is here natively, except for, the Indonesian escapees or releases. And then is the climate changing there, warmer waters? Not really. So the temperature changes, obviously the water temperature changes over the year. So in the winter, you'll get down into the low 70s. In summer, you'll be in mid 80s. But it's been the same for as long as I've been diving here. So, maybe over 20 or 30 years, there's been a change, but I haven't noticed it between when I first came here in 2008, I think, and now it all seems, the water temperature seems to be the same. But as with everywhere, I'm sure it's trending up a little bit. But I'm not 100% on that. So this is this is actually the same frogfish as this one. This was the first night we found her, and this was on one of the last days we saw her. So she grew a lot hairier, had a lot more growth on her by the time she disappeared, and was considerably bigger. The one on the left, snooted and reduction ring for cross lighting, cut out the background easily. The one on the right, you can tell she lives in shallow water. She was living right under one of the docks. And that was during the time when we had the bait balls and really nice conditions. I was hoping to get a bait ball above her. I wasn't that lucky, but I did manage to get the sun rays, and then snooted her from the top just to highlight the fish and not all the the muck in the background. This is an enormous female that we saw last fall. She'd been hanging out with a male, and then the male conspicuously disappeared, and she showed up with a giant lump in her belly that you can sort of see here, and we never saw the male again. And often the females are known to cannibalize on the smaller males, so I suspect that's what happened. But I love this fish, and I'm repeating myself over and over, but snoot and reduction ring for cross light, you can bring out some of the texture, you cut out all the background. There's still plenty of backscatter in here, but I don't think it detracts from her. And you can see her lure here. Sometimes they'll just wander around with it out. They're not even waving it around. They just seem to have it stuck out in front of them. I don't know if they're actively hunting when they do that, but it doesn't seem to be all that effective because it just looks like another twig or something in the water. And then we went over the black ones. There's a couple here right now. For whatever reason, they seem to favor the bright white sand, which is about as uncamouflaged as you can get. And they're also living in about 3 or 4 feet of water right off the beach. I don't know how none of them have been stomped on by beachgoers, but they seem to be okay. And they're feeding fine because they're growing. So somehow, even despite the fact that they don't blend in at all, they are quite successful. Arguably the worst fish in the world to photograph is a black frogfish, especially one on white sand. Exposing them is nearly impossible. And this is the best I could do without blowing out the sand, but getting some detail on the fish. It's very, very hard. And I wouldn't consider this an overly great success. But I felt that since we're talking about frogfish and I love frogfish, that I'd include this one anyway, just to show the variety that we get here. Another hairy variety. This is a small little male. He's one of the ones that has been seen chasing the big female around recently. Again, plenty of backscatter, cross-lit, snoot from the left, reduction ring strobe from the right. And visibility is not very good. There's plenty of stuff in the water, plenty of crap in the water, but you can easily cut it out. One thing I would recommend if you dive a lot in shallow or bright water and you want to get the black backgrounds is to actually get a 2 or 3 stop ND filter for your macro lenses. It cuts out the, a little bit more light. So if especially here at the bridge, it's really hard to cut out all ambient light during the day because it's so shallow and it's so bright. So I usually use a 3 or 4 stop ND filter on the front of my macro lens. It doesn't seem to hinder the focusing of the camera. Mine's trash anyway, so I wouldn't really know. But as long as your camera can autofocus with the ND filter on, and you get a high quality one that's not going to destroy your image quality, I think it can work really well for shallow water macro or any sort of black background macro. And I've used them some for wide angle as well, but for the black background, studio style-esque macro, I think the ND filter can really be beneficial in bright shallow water.
What do you use for a reduction ring?
So I shoot the Retras. Retra has their own little reduction ring. I think it could be better. It's not very deep. If they doubled the depth of it, I think it would be fantastic. And I was talking to a friend who has a 3D printer. John, you have one too, so maybe I'll talk to you about it too, but about making reduction rings for strobes that are a bit deeper to cut that light just a little bit more. Because they'd be useful for different things, but especially here, I find myself sometimes not quite getting the lighting that I want. And if I had the right reduction ring, I think it would work well. But yeah, the retro ones are great. I don't know if anybody else actually really makes something similar. CCAM does, I think. But they seem like one of those things you could build relatively easily on your own, especially if you had access to a 3D printer. And then last, this is the same frogfish as the one on the right here, this guy. This was one of the times she changed color. And I've been after this luring shot forever. I've been lucky enough to see a lot of frogfish in my diving, but I'd never gotten a picture of one luring. And then this one finally obliged me and cast it out and dangled it out. And I managed to get my lighting right and get it in focus. And I was pretty thrilled with that. I turned the camera off immediately after taking the picture and didn't take another picture the rest of the dive because I was so paranoid about something going wrong with the camera and losing the picture. So I missed some other opportunities in that dive, but that was okay because I got the one I was after. But I really enjoyed that. Again, snoot from the left, reduction ring from the right. It sounds like a broken record, but it works really well for macro stuff, especially if you like the moodier studio look, which I clearly enjoy because 3/4 of my pictures feature that. But that's all of my pictures from Blue. Well, it's not all of them, I have plenty, but that's the end of my talk. I've rambled enough, I think.
Awesome, thank you. That was fantastic. We shall open it up for questions. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and rattle them off.
Hey, Matt, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to load a question for you here. If I want to come to the bridge and see this stuff, who would I talk to do that?
Me. Shameless plug. I do offer guided dives at the bridge and workshops if people want them. So, I dive here multiple times weekly usually, so I know where a lot of the stuff is. And I can find it pretty reliably and put you on stuff quite easily. As long as you don't give me something really difficult to find. Like nobody's requested a long-nosed batfish yet, thankfully. Nobody's requested a blanket octopus. But if you want batfish or seahorses or frogfish or any of that stuff, I can put you on those pretty easily. And if you want any photo tips, I can help with that as well.
How do people get a hold of you?
So my website is just the number 9 and then milesnorth.com. So I have galleries there. I have my Blue Heron page there for people to sign up through that. Or my Instagram handle is formerly homeless photographer, which is another story, but you can find me on Instagram through that. And I will respond to either email or Instagram messages. And then you could try on Facebook, but not as much on there.
I think John just put your website in the chat for anyone who's interested.
Thanks, buddy. I forgot that was there.
How different are the different areas around the bridge? Like I've only dove like I guess the west southwest side of the bridge.
Yeah.
Like how does the other side areas compare?
So everybody's got their favorite section. So the west southwest, you have the fishing pier and the bridge, and then you have a lot of rubble and stuff out in front of those. So you can get seahorses and batfish and jawfish and things like that. If you go right off the beach, all of that area out there is all sand and seagrass. And then a couple artificial reefs, but and then the mooring buoys for boats and like the swimming area are out there. So those often get seahorses and frogfish. In the seagrass, you'll get the long arm octopus. But you'll notice if you dive it enough that you get a lot of different stuff based on which microhabitat you dive in. And then like under the docks in that picture I had at the beginning, let me go back. There's true muck. So you have real muck diving, which seems to get, so over here in all these docks and some over here, you get a really, really heavy silty bottom, which seems to attract, different animals that you won't see on other parts of the site. You have your sand and seagrass all out in here. Both of the channels are heavy, like rubble and structure. You have some small wrecks and artificial reefs out there too. So, just depending on what you're looking to see, the west side where you dove is generally not my favorite. I only go over there if there's something specific I want. I enjoy diving off the beach because it has a lot of the frogfish and seahorses, and I enjoy diving the east side over here, A, because less people dive it, and B, because you can easily access muck, rubble, and the docks all in a relatively small area. So you get a huge variety of potential subjects on one dive without having to go very far. And the lack of divers on that side compared to the west usually is in favor of diving over here because there's a lot less. And then if you go all the way out in here, you don't see any divers. And this is all back to sand and seagrass out here. So you get, different things up that way as well. And the other nice thing about this side and all the way up here is anything you find out there, nobody else is seeing. So nobody's harassed it. It hasn't been photographed a million times. Sometimes I'll just skip over stuff that's out here or in these channels because I know it's been photographed to death and you just kind of feel bad. Or there's no new imaging opportunity because everybody has photographed it in every possible way. But so that's one of the other reasons I like diving out this way as well, because nobody goes there. There's subjects that nobody else is seeing. And if you're okay diving in like 6 feet of water with boats going over you, you can see some cool stuff and photograph some cool stuff.
Matt,
Do you provide armor?
No, I do not.
There was some discussion kind of before we got going here, kind of about the challenge of it being tidal, and maybe you can dive it once or twice per day if you're lucky. So I guess, can you maybe talk a little bit about what are some of the other diving and photography opportunities in the area? Because I know like when I've looked at trips there, it's kind of a good way to fill out an entire trip and like know about, because there's some other amazing photo opportunities too.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of the dive boats, actually, if I expanded this map a little bit this way, a lot of the dive boats in the area leave from right out of there. So you have multiple shark diving boats, you have shark free diving boats, you have your normal like dive charters that do the reefs. If you go, we have a lot. Jupiter in this area is fantastic for sharks. So right now on the wrecks, you could reliably get this time of year hammerheads, tigers, bulls, lemons, sandbar. I don't know if I said hammerheads, maybe I did. Silkies are going to show up soon. Duskies are going to show up soon. There's been great whites for some reason. So you can do a lot of the shark diving. If you go a bit north, if you come in August, September, October, we get Goliath grouper season. So you have all the Goliaths coming in, and they'll do the wreck dives up there where you get, the massive 6 to 8 foot Goliaths out there. And then, the biggest trend right now is Blackwater. All the Blackwater boats leave from this same area as well. And they offer them 4 nights a week here. So if you want to Blackwater, you can Blackwater your ass off. And as long as the weather's good, they go out. So there's a Walker's Dive Charters goes out 3 nights a week. Pura Vida goes out 1 night a week. And then you could always do the bridge during the day and then Blackwater at night. So yeah, there's a lot of fantastic diving in like the 15-mile stretch between here and Jupiter. And then if you wanted to do the Keys, you can get down in there too. If you go any further north of Jupiter, it starts to get pretty mediocre. But so the bridge is kind of central to all of the good diving here. You could go heavily macro focus at the bridge and then go do sharks and Blackwater and Goliaths if you time it right. And so there's always something. And then if you go down a little bit further south, there's a couple beaches down there that are really good for photographing sea turtles right off the beach, whether you're scuba or snorkeling. And then, we get lots of turtles out here anyway, especially now it's the start of turtle nesting season. So if you go dive the reefs right now, loggerheads, greens, hawksbills, and if you're ridiculously lucky, leatherbacks, you could get out there. Somebody got a leatherback right off the beach the other day, one morning. So I'm hopeful for one of those at some point, but not too hopeful because it's not going to happen, but you never know. Right. I won't be insulted if there's no more questions.
Okay. If no more questions, thanks again to Matt. Fantastic presentation. I know I'm looking forward to my company's sales meeting in May and June, which is going to be in Florida. I just have my fingers crossed that it's near West Palm so that I can get in some diving while I'm out there as well. Clearly, it'd be nice to see the eastern side of the bridge since I've only seen the western side and you're not too crazy about it. So hopefully see the good stuff.
Good stuff if you come.
And actually, I do have one question for you. Did you say you people stay in hotels over on the right-hand side, or?
Yeah, so you can actually see one right here is Open Waters Resort.
Okay.
It's convenient. I wouldn't say it's 5-star. If you can rough it a little bit, that one's really good. The other benefit of Open Waters is because they have their own dock. Even if the tides don't line up, you can dive whenever you want. So even if say the night tide is at midnight and you want to go dive, you can dive off the dock, whereas you wouldn't be able to from the actual park. But you can still access the site from their dock and dive it during any high tide, regardless of time. And then there's a couple other places somewhere in here that you can access the water as well. Or the other option is there's a couple free parking lots not too far over here, and there's a little access like stairway somewhere right in here. So you could always just drop your stuff on the beach, park your car, and walk back and dive whenever you want. That's not enforced. You shouldn't be in the park at the really late hours for safety reasons, not necessarily because they'll kick you out or ticket you or anything like that. But yeah, Open Waters, or if you wanted to park and then walk in over here, those are options. And I think there is one other place somewhere in this area that has lodging as well. But yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Matt. Certainly appreciate you staying up late, seeing you're on East Coast time. So it's a wild Friday night for you.
It is so far past my bedtime. But this was fun. I'm glad you guys had me on, and hopefully I did an okay job and nobody fell asleep during it. But yeah.
Hey, it's
That's
fantastic diving. I'm sure no one here fell asleep, and if they did, well, they missed out. So
thank you.
okay.
Thanks, Ken.
So with that, we'll continue on to the last part of the meeting.